A still life is a drawing of a setting
Right.
that does not involve any movement. It's usually a plate of fruit, a field, or something similar.
I would say maybe not a field. I'd call a field a landscape, but fruit definitely was correct. And so a still life is typically a painting or drawing that includes an arrangement of objects. And those objects can range in a number of things. They're typically inanimate objects. They don't move, right? So they makes them still. And so there are things like fruit and flowers, objects, different objects like glass and bowls. Okay. I see some people jotting down notes. You don't actually need to really worry about this right now. I actually have the pages where I would like you to take the notes, and I have it marked for you guys. Okay. So I apologize for not saying that sooner, but we are going to be doing a still life. Now, why? Right. The reason is that portraits are kind of tough to draw a person, right? Let's have a model drawing from life. They're sitting there and people move and twitch and they get tired. And so inanimate objects are really good practice. There are people whose art is all about still life, but most artists use still life as practice for how to get better for drawing. And that's how we're going to take this assignment, is we're going to learn how to make things look three-dimensional. Okay, so I'll have some examples of student work for you so that you can see how a lot of just good practice will lead to good results for you. Okay, so this is where we're going to start taking some notes. So we already defined this, but your artwork is going to have good composition. We're going to have effective composition. That's actually our target today, is to crop a still life photo for good composition. Who remembers what composition is? We did it for the toy assignment. We did it for the value web. What's composition?
I think composition is like how you place certain items. For example, with the toy drawing, we had to like place our toy with certain places to make like some sort of to make something dynamic or something. I'm sorry, I can't speak today.
That's okay. We did it for movement, right? We wanted the eye to travel around the composition. And so composition is always intentional. And that's the thing I really want you to learn. This might be the last art class you ever have. Okay. And that's really sad to me because you guys are doing actually a pretty good job being remote. I know that's really tough. I've taken some online classes lately, so I understand and sympathize. But what I want you to take out, besides the fact that you can draw a little bit better, is that I also want you to think really carefully about what you draw and how you draw it. So we want to be thoughtful in it, because sadly, I'm not having you create your own still lifes. I really toyed with this idea. I thought, okay, I could just have you guys sit a bunch of objects up at home and draw it yourself. But the problem is that people pick things that are too hard, too easy. They don't really go together really well. So if you take drawing 2, we'll do some more methodical still life where you get to put more of your own ideas into it. Okay, we're going to use it for learning composition and learning technique. Okay, we are going to focus. So last assignment, we did visual movement. I don't want you to forget about that. You're going to find that you can create visual movement through still life, which seems odd, but there's certain photos that will naturally have this for you. But for the focus of this lesson, we're going to focus on focal point. Okay, everyone is going to have a focal point. So jot down these notes. A focal point is a specific place of visual evidence in a work of art. It creates the center of attention. Okay, so your eye is drawn to the most important area. Now, if you remember from the toy assignment, we already talked about that, but I didn't make you have this. For this assignment, everyone's going to have a focal point. Okay, so you're going to have to tell me what it is eventually when you get to start drawing. Now, I also want to point out that sometimes your focal point isn't necessarily my focal point. Sometimes my eye goes somewhere else, and that's okay. But we're going to think carefully about where we place this focal point to set it up for success. Okay? So we're going to do focal point. And the other thing we're going to do is balance. So balance we can talk about for a number of different things. What we're going to focus on here is asymmetrical balance, because I intentionally did not take and center things, but we're going to focus on a balance between the imagery and the background. Do you think you want a lot of background in this image? What do you think? Is it about the background or is it about the objects of the still life?
The objects.
The objects. So we really have to make sure that we think about a balance. And normally I say 60-40. 60% object, 40% background, or you could have less background too. But you wouldn't want to do 50-50 or anything less where there's more background than objects, okay? So we're going to try to create visual balance. And I'm going to say this as you guys are jotting down your notes, is that this is something that is intuitive to some people. Some people are really good at it. I had a really good high school teacher who I felt did a good job explaining this, and it's something I already it was something I naturally understood and had a good feel for, but some of us have to learn this, okay? And so we have to be very intentional when we think about placement, and that's what we're going to focus on today, is how to get you to move your compositional skills up to the next level. You might not be perfect yet, but we want to see some improvement, okay? Any questions on focal point or balance? Okay, if I go too slow or too fast on these notes, you have this agenda or this on the agenda, and you can always go back and add to your vocabulary. Okay, so we're also going to have foreground, middle ground, and background. So when we pick a still life, we're going to go ahead and crop it. Now, some people get clever and they're like, I'm going to crop it so extreme that I only have a part of a pumpkin. That's not going to work. You're going to have foreground, middle ground, and background. So foreground is in the front. Don't feel like you have to write down this whole definition. If you focus on foreground is front, I'm okay with that. So you're going to have some stuff in the front. Then you're going to have background. Now the background in our picture is going to be negative space and fabric. You're going to see that in all of the pictures, there's some like a white sheet as the background, and we are going to do that. There are some photos where there is the classroom in the negative space, and you do not have to draw it. You actually can see that here in this really large example. Yours is not going to be this big, that the background is just some fabric in the back. You can notice that there's nothing in the top here. They didn't include it, right? That's just not necessary for what we're doing. Okay, so we've got foreground, background, and we're going to have middle ground. So middle ground is going to be in between the front and the back. So you're going to have overlap. Now, I didn't include that in the definition, but I think that's a general term most of you already know, right? So you're going to have some sense of overlap. You don't want things feeling like they're all side by side and then there's just background. You have to have 3 levels of space. Now, there could be more. You might have 4 or 5 levels of space depending on the photo that you choose. But when I say 5 levels, I may say there's 3 levels of middle ground. Does that make sense? Because you can have a lot of middle. Okay. You guys ready to move on? I told you didn't have to write all this. I just want to make sure you have a basic understanding. So what do you think is in the foreground of this one? What do you think is in the foreground? Feel free to write it in the chat. What do you think is in the foreground? I have a word bank at the top for you guys. You can write it in the chat, it's fine. Okay. We're getting some answers here. So normally the foreground is where you see the whole thing, right? It's going to be in front of other things. So the things that are in front are the plant and the skull. even though the skull is kind of higher in the image, right? It's on top of the book, right? So the book is the middle ground, and then the table would be the background. Okay, so we're going to use the rule of thirds. We've done this before. Okay, I want to get you a lot of practice with this. So compositional arrangement, what I'd like you to do is to use the rule of thirds. So you can do this kind of with your imagination. And what I want you to do is to put your focal point, right, in one of these cross areas, right? So in one of these intersecting marks, that's where I want you to place your focal point, your most important area, right? Okay, where are we not going to put our focal point?
In the box.
In which one?
The middle.
The middle, right? So the big red X means no, right? And the green means go. So your focal point can go in the green areas, but I don't want it in the middle. This is the thing you have to unlearn. This is where most people make their mistakes, okay? So do not, if you want to draw this diagram as a good reminder for yourself, you can do that, okay? So here is a student example of a still life, right? This is just from another year. This is actually one of my husband's students, okay? What's the focal point here? What do you think? Go ahead and write it in the chat. I guarantee that some of us will have different opinions, but let's see where most of our eyes go. Go ahead and put it in the chat. I want to see an answer from everyone. So wake up if you're asleep. Got lots of B's, got a few C's, right? Lots of B's, C's, got a D there or two. Okay, so this is a good example of how your eye might go somewhere different than my eye. Okay, now this is not the right answer. Okay, like I said, I'm just happy that things aren't centered. Okay, but my eye goes to C. And the reason my eye goes to C is that there is a lot more stuff in the C area than there is in the other three. And so I look for differences. That's where I'm trained. Okay, so does that make sense? Okay, so that's one way you can create focal point. Okay, is through having more and less somewhere else. But notice, shifted out of the center. Okay, what do you think the focal point of this one is? Another example of a student work. What do you think? Put it in the chat. This one's a little mixed, and this one surprises me a little bit. What's the coolest object in this one?
The skull.
The skull is. So the B and the D people probably are more like, at least that's probably what the reason they shifted at the center is they really wanted to emphasize that skull. So this is like an antelope skull. That's, I can tell from the horns. So this is one of the examples that came out from when my student teacher was here, because she was a world traveler. The antelope came from Africa. She brought it back from her travels, which was kind of cool. So here, I would probably say B is probably the answer. But another way to create focal point is what you think is the best object or the most interesting object, shifting that out of the center. Okay. Now this one has some visual movement, right? This one has visual movement. You guys remember from the toy assignment? How does your eye travel on this one? Who can share? What do you think?
My eye personally moves from like those like grinders or like shakers or bottles or whatever in the background to the tools and then down to the garlic being cut.
Right, it almost has a spiral sort of effect. I agree. So it goes from the salt and pepper to the utensils like the whisk, and then spirals down to the spices and to the garlic. And so it kind of travels and moves. So you can look for those things in your image too, right? Another thing that we often use with balance is the concept of visual weight, right? Where's the visual weight on this, left or right? Where's the visual weight? Left or right? What do you think? Got some lefts in the chat. I appreciate that, right? That picture, right? It's really large, right? And so it takes up a lot of space. And so once again, not centered, shifted the weight to the right side. Okay, so here's some student examples, right? I just wanted to make sure I had some student examples for you. So making sure that things are not centered, right? You want to make sure that you pull the visual weight out of the center. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but what's something they could do to make this composition better? Why was Mrs. Miles unhappy with this one?
I think you're probably unhappy with this one because one, the skull's eyes are in the middle, and two, it's more background than it is the imagery.
Right, so it's just way too centered. So really shifting it out of the center. Okay, so these are the things that you are going to focus on today when you are finding your images. So you need to have, and when you crop, you need to use a focal point. You want to make sure it's not centered and use the rule of thirds. You want to have balance. Now I need to delete this. We are not going to do symmetrical balance. This was for a still life that we made and I forgot to edit this one. So sadly, when we're at school, I have you guys arrange your own, like in the classroom, but we can't do that here. So we're just going to do an asymmetrical balance, okay? And then you need to have 3 layers of space. So foreground, middle ground, background. So there's going to be some overlap, okay? Okay, so I'm going to go back to the agenda. I want you to also know that some of these directions, actually, let me show you one more slide. Okay. Okay, so the directions are on the agenda. I have step-by-step instructions for you, and I have videos. And so basically what we're doing today is we're going to find 2 to 4 images that I have. And so I've got a bunch for you to look through first. So you're going to just be looking and looking and looking and trying to find some that you like. Okay. So this first one on the left, you guys see the one on the left? That's my original photo. Okay. Then I saved it and I put it in a program called Photopea. Photopea is very similar to an online version of Photoshop. And you're going to go into there and you're going to crop it. Notice I cropped it as a vertical. You can make your drawing either vertical or horizontal, but notice that you have to take a portion of the image. You're not doing the whole thing. You just need focal point, asymmetrical balance, and 3 levels of space. Okay? So you're going to experiment with this with a few different images. So that's all I want you to do today. We're not doing any drawing. Today we're just looking for good composition and tweaking and playing with Photopea. Okay? So when you guys go to the agenda, that's where most of your links are. You're going to have to open this up. All I want you to do first is to create yourself a Drawing One Still Life folder, because you don't have access to edit my photos. You only have access to copy them, because we're using these photos for everyone plus 8th hour and 1st and 4th. So there's 4 sections of Drawing One, all using these photos. So you have to copy and paste them into your folder in order to be able to use them. Okay. So that's the first thing you guys are going to do. So step 3. And then step 4, no skulls, animal skulls, and from my husband, black and white still life. Those are your choices. Okay. So that's where you're going to copy the image and stick it in the folder. Most of you can handle that, but if you need directions, I made a video for how to create and save those folders under step 3. Okay. That's all I'm going to say right now. Okay. When you're done, searching for photos. If you need to take a break, that's fine. But you need to make sure that you crop your photos today because we are drawing on Thursday. Okay. If you start to work on the cropping and you're online with Zoom and Photopea and you cut out, don't worry about it. Just try to come back in, especially if you have questions. Okay. But I don't want people to leave and then not do the assignment. You have to get this done today, or you're going to be really far behind and I won't be able to help you when I'm trying to help other people draw.